Hello and welcome to Whisky Resource. My name is Mark and this is part 2 of So You Want to Start Drinking Scotch Whisky. That was a video that I put out back in April of 2020. If you didn't see the video, you can go and check it out there. But to give you a quick summary, it's about the definition of what is a single malt whisky. What is a single grain whisky? What's a blended malt whisky? What's a blended grain whisky? And ultimately, what is a blended Scotch whisky? So it's a quick video that goes on for 14 minutes, which goes over what those are to give you a bit of an idea. So this is part 2. I had intended on following up the part 1 quite quickly with this part 2, but it never materialised. I was delayed. So that is now. It's based off the fact that quite often when I'm on the forums on Facebook, for example, whisky forums, I see a very common question being asked, particularly by people either new to whisky or who've been previously maybe bourbon drinkers or rum drinkers. And they ask, I've been drinking rum and I want to start getting into scotch. What do you recommend? Where should I start? And a lot of the forums, unfortunately, end up falling into the same kind of a trap. What happens is an individual will recommend a whisky that they themselves enjoy, that they get a pleasure out of drinking, that maybe that individual should try because, well, they enjoy it, they recommend it. And there's nothing wrong with recommendations. However, that whisky may not necessarily be the correct whisky for the stage of the journey that they're at. Maybe they want to start with something not too heavy, not too bold. Maybe they're not ready for a deep and heavy Octomore from Bruichladdich with those heavy peated. Or the Ardbegs. Maybe that's just too much. Likewise, they probably wouldn't really want to jump straight into a 25-year-old Deanston or a really heavy sherry bomb, maybe like a Glenallachie or a Glenfarclas 105, or there's countless different examples of whiskies that probably won't be the best recommendation for somebody starting out on their whisky journey. Now, I've been drinking bourbon for several decades. Ever since I was back in university, bourbon was my go-to drink. And for me, switching to Scotch whisky is a relatively new thing. About 3 years or so that I've been doing the Scotch whisky journey, which is still really young when you consider the length of time that a lot of people have been doing the whisky journey. But I've picked up quite a few things, and I'm going off a little bit of my experience when I come up with this video as to what worked for me, but also some input from things that maybe I could have done if I stopped and thinking about it a bit more. So, where do you begin? A lot of people will pop into their supermarket, let's say it's an Asda, and they'll look at the shelf full of whiskies. Maybe they'll take a photo, they'll see what's on offer. They may pick up a bottle of something and take it home. They'll go online and they'll want reassurance that the whisky they bought is a good choice, let's say. So they'll post a photo and say, just pick this up, put a photo of the shelf from Asda. Did I buy right whisky? What else should I have bought? Or should I have bought something different? And invariably you'll have the comments where somebody says, Ardbeg 10, Lafroy 10, Lafroy Select, Glenfiddich 18. It goes on. There's so many different whiskies that are really good, but there are also on that shelf lots of whiskies that, to be honest, you probably would want to avoid as a starter whisky, and they're not necessarily the Ardbeg. That's where this will come in a bit later on in the video. I'm going to take a sip. Laptop's starting to fan up, so I apologise for any fan noise that we get going here. Oh dear, this laptop really needs to be replaced. Okay, so where do we begin? Well, when you look at their supermarket shelves, there are a few whiskies there that you would consider to be the correct pitch for somebody new to whisky. Not necessarily new, switching from bourbon, but new to Scotch whisky with no kind of a background. Maybe they've had a few whiskies at a pub or around a friend's house. Maybe they didn't really have a pleasurable experience. Maybe they tasted, oh, I have to explore a bit more whisky. And the whiskies on the shelves in the supermarkets invariably can't go wrong picking up will be, let's say, the Glenlivet, the Founders Reserve, the 12-year-old. Did I say Glenfiddich? I mean Glenlivet. Glenlivet Founders, Glenlivet 12, but also the Glenfiddich 12. But we're going to stop there because each supermarket has different whiskies on different shelves. And there's a bit of a more logical approach that you can take when you're wanting to start to explore whisky that doesn't involve buying a full bottle, at least not straight away. There are plenty of sites online. You can look at Master of Malt, for example, the Whisky Exchange. There's another one, I think it's called the Dram Club. So the Whisky Tasting Company. I think there's one called the Dram Club. And you can buy sample packs, or you can build your own tasting packs. And they're pitched at people who are starting out, and it's a selection of whiskies that are recommended for people on the start of their journey. But let's go with a build your own scenario here, because when you're doing a tasting pack, you are going with what other people have put into the pack that they think is probably kind of an approach to take, and invariably they go light and delicate, fruity bit smoky, really fruity like sherry, and then quite medium to heavy peat smoke. And for somebody starting off at whiskey, it'll give you a broad spectrum of the different types of whiskey, but the chances are you're going to get part of the way through that pack, start to get overwhelmed with the taste and the flavour and the nose and the sensation of it all. So we're going to break it down and we're going to look at this objectively. Now, we're starting with somebody here who isn't particularly used to drinking spirits, so they haven't come from a bourbon background. So a heavy strength alcohol, a 50-60% a cask strength whiskey, is definitely not the way to go here. We don't want to be looking at watering down whiskey. We don't want to be looking at trying to tackle those neat. We're looking at whiskies at 40 to 43%, and if there's the odd 46 sneaks in there, that's fine, because there'll be a reason why that 46 may be a bit more manageable. But 40 to 43 invariably is what you're looking at. In terms of age, non-age statement whiskies are fine. There are some reviewers will not touch non-age statement whiskies. They poo-poo them, they look down on them. But invariably, non-age statement whiskies represent really good value for money. And when you're starting out on whiskey, the last thing you want to do is to be picking up a full-size bottle, paid quite a bit of money for it, that you've not yet tried, and for you to not enjoy it. And whilst that bottle isn't wasted, because you can always put it at the back of your cupboard and come back to it later on down the journey, it's money you've spent on something that could have probably been best spent on something more approachable now rather than later on. So age, non-age statement, and I would probably say you're looking at whiskies a maximum 15-year-old. And I probably wouldn't even go there. I would be looking at 12-year-olds, 10-year-olds and 8-year-olds with those non-age statements, or the kind of areas you want to be looking at. And the styles of whiskey. Well, this is the real crunch of it. The way I would approach it, and the way that generally I think a lot of people should really approach it, is by looking at different whiskies, and each from different regions, and to get a feel for the style of the region and the style of the whiskey. So, if you were to go to Master of Malt, you can build tasting sets up, and in the tasting set you can put 5 different 30ml whiskies in. Now each sample is going to have a different price, and when you look at the price, you're thinking, well, they're not that cheap. You're looking at £5 per sample. But that's 5 different whiskies that you're going to experience. Yes, you could probably pick up one bottle from a supermarket for that same £5 per sample. But if you're not going to enjoy that whiskey, you've had to put it to one side, you're down £25 and you've not got nothing to try. Buy 5 samples at £5 each, you've got a little bit of delivery on top. But if you don't like one of them, it's only one 30ml sample that you've tried. You've still got another 4 that you can try, and you may find that one of those 4 you really enjoy, or all of them you really enjoy, and you may buy another bottle of something that you enjoyed the most. So yes, you'll be spending a little bit more money because you will be wanting to buy a full bottle to try, but at least you've had that chance to try and to rule out what avenue you're going to go down. So let's look at this. We've got various regions in Scotland. Okay, so you've got your lowland regions, you've got your highland regions, Speyside, which is part of Highland. Speyside itself is a separate region, really, for the purposes of this. You've got your islands, which again are Highland, but islands really, and then you've got Islay. Okay, you notice there's one region there that I've not mentioned, and that is Campbelltown. Because Campbelltown provides a little bit of a challenge when it comes to trying to find the correct pitch of whiskey. But we'll mention one as a 6th that you could potentially substitute in. So, for lowland, there aren't that many lowland distilleries, and you could potentially be looking at doing a grain whiskey. But at this point in the exercise, I'd probably avoid looking at grain stuff right now. And I'd concentrate on a lowland distillery. And one of the lowland distilleries you could quite happily look at would be Auchtertosh. And Auchtertosh, there's 2 main whiskies they do that you could potentially consider doing a sample of. You've got their American oak, American wood, and then you've got their 12-year-old. Now I'd be tempted to go to the 12-year-old, grab a sample of the 12-year-old. Now, as I speak, Master of Malt don't do the 12-year-old as a sample. They only do the 3-wood. I've not tried the 3-wood yet, but I would say it's probably still an okay one to go with. But ideally, the American oak would be that, or the 12-year-old. There is another one that you could go for, which is the one I've just poured the dram off, which is the Glenfarclas 12. Again, it's quite a delicate whiskey. But I would save that one for later. I probably wouldn't delve straight into that one. It's a nice whiskey. It might be enjoyable straight away, but I'll probably leave that, because that has another point in the story. So you've got an Auchtertosh to start with as your lowland whiskey. So then you're looking at Speyside as the next region. What do you really want to look for as a Speyside? Typically they're quite fruity. They can be sherried. There are so many choices here for the Speyside region. I've mentioned Glenfiddich 12-year-old. Certainly, it's a fruity, really enjoyable, tasty whiskey. You won't go wrong with trying it. You probably already tried it, so you can't go wrong with it. Then you've got Glenlivet, the Founders Reserve. A lot of people dismiss the Founders Reserve as being a poor whiskey. But you've got to try poor whiskies to understand them and to possibly pick them out as something that maybe you didn't enjoy. However, I think it's a perfectly fine whiskey. It's tasty. It's an easy sipper. But the Founders Reserve, or the 12-year-old, preferably the 12-year-old. So notice I've chosen two age statement of 12-year-olds there, rather than non-age statements. So you've got those 2. You could even do a Glenfarclas 10-year-old or a Glenfarclas 12-year-old are perfectly acceptable whiskies. And there are others within the Speyside region, but we'll want to be staying relatively simple here. Then we're looking at Highland whiskey. And again, we're spoiled for choice. This is where I would probably jump a strength level and would probably be going between the Glencadam 10, which sits at 46% ABV, for a Deanston 12. You could even do the Deanston Virgin Oak. But they sit at 46.3% ABV, which is fine because they don't actually come across too hot. They're very well balanced, and the flavour profiles hide the alcohol strength somewhat. And as long as you take your time and sip it and enjoy it, and don't ever neck it back. Out of those two, I would probably say the Glencairn 10 would be the way forward. It's more delicate. It's got some really nice subtle flavours in there. It's not too heavy at all. So now we're looking at island whiskies. And this provides a bit more of a challenge because invariably with an island whisky, you're going to be having elements of smoke and peat. And which island you go with? Well, you could go with Highland Park 12. Again, you're going to be getting smoke elements. You could be going with a Jura 10. You're going to be getting smoke elements. You could go with Tobermory 12 on Mull. You don't need to go with an island whisky. You could opt for the Campbelltown. And the Campbelltown that you could probably look to go with and get away with that element of smoke, which the island whiskies have, would maybe be a Kilkerran 12. Now we'll move on to Islay. Islay presents the biggest challenge of all, because amongst the many great distilleries there, you've got to identify one that is not going to overwhelm you with strong flavours of peat. And there's only one that comes out to mind, and that is the Bunnahabhain 12-year-old. And I've done a review of that. You can check that out if you wish to. But the Bunnahabhain 12, for my mind, is the most whisky of all the whiskies I've tried. It is a quintessential description of flavour and taste as to what a whisky is for my mind. It is superb. But I wouldn't be drinking that one first in the pack. I'd probably come back to that one as the last one in the journey, even after, let's say, a Kilkerran 12. Because it could be too much still. There are some honourable mentions that I haven't made. And they are Tom and Tool, or Tom and Towel, Tom and Towel 10 or Tom and Towel 12. They are good whiskies. They're light, fruity. Nothing wrong with them. So that's kind of where I would take things, but you're looking at doing a build your own tasting pack. Now, you may not necessarily want to pay the kind of prices that the online retailers are charging for these packs. Bear in mind the price you may be paying for a bottle of whiskey from a shop shelf. So ask around, see where your local whiskey group is, because there could be people within the whiskey group who are happy to share with you some drams from their collection along the lines of those ones I've mentioned. They may want a little bit of compensation to cover the costs of bottling those samples up for you, and that's all well and good. That's fine. So you've tried 5 whiskies from different regions, and what you're going to get from that is an idea of the different tastes and flavours and profiles that each different area has. Because traditionally, each whiskey region has its own style, and you're going to try and be identifying the style through flavour. What I would do here is, once you've tried them, whichever one you enjoy the most, let's say that you try the Speyside and you enjoy the Speyside the most, you've gone, let's say, with the Glenfiddich 12. What do you do now? You've tried the Glenfiddich 12, the sample, you really enjoyed it. Buy a bottle of the Glenfiddich 12. Buy one, try one. Don't go on anything else, just try that bottle. Drink that bottle over your own time. Get to enjoy it. Get to explore the depths of the flavours. Sit down, pen and paper, and make a note of what smells are you getting. Is it fruity? What type of fruit? Is it sweet? What type of sweet? Is it an artificial sweet? Is it a fruit sweet? Is it a candied sweet? Is it a chemical sweet? Those kind of things. Look at the flavour and do the same thing. Try and pick out, and you will find the more that you drink that whiskey, over time, slowly sipping, without distraction, with a clean palate, you'll start picking out things. You've enjoyed the bottle of 12-year-old Glenfiddich. What to do now? You can go and you can buy a Glenfiddich tasting pack. It has the 12, the 15 and the 18 in it. I'll probably pick that up. Yes, you've tried the 12. Fantastic. Try the 15 in the pack. See what you make of the 15. See if you enjoy it. Try and compare the 15 back to the 12. With those two miniatures, do a side-by-side comparison. See what you can pick out. See whether or not the continuation of the Glenfiddich 12 to the 15 continues your enjoyment. And if you find that you're not ready for the 15 yet, nothing wrong with that. Have a look at other space sides which are thereabouts similar to the Glenfiddich 12. So you'd be looking at doing a bit of research, going online and asking people. Again, they're going to give you their own personal preference, but some of them, amongst all of the noise, will give you some really sound advice. I would recommend, well, if you like the 12 from Glenfiddich, again, Glenlivet 12, Glenfarclas. Maybe they'll recommend something like a Glenrothes, a Glenallachie, it's just popped out of my head. There's plenty of Glens. But use some of the other web resources. I don't want to push my website too much, but hey, that's what I'm here for, is to push my website. You can put in a search for Glenfiddich 12, because that's on there, and it'll give you the distillery tasting notes. Each of the individual tasting notes are on there, and you'll be able to write them down if you wish to, but each one of them on the website is hyperlinked. You can click on a particular flavour, and it will then load up other whiskies that have that same flavour. Conversely, if there's a flavour you don't like, well, don't click on it. Ignore it. But make a note of the flavours. You can do searches based on, if you go to the actual search system, you can actually choose a combination of flavours that you want to actually search on. And if there's a whiskey on my database that matches, it'll show you them. And you may be able to consider going for that one. And you can then maybe look to eliminate, if some of them are peat smoke, remove the peat smoke ones. But that gives you a methodology to moving on. Once you've kind of established that you've tried a few whiskies that you've really enjoyed, but you really want to try and explore maybe your sense of nosing and smell and taste rather. How are you going to go about doing that? Well, I've got some props that might help with this. So the first one would be to maybe consider picking up something like this, which I've mentioned before. It's on the Chivas Regal 12-year-old review. I briefly mentioned this tasting pack, but this is tasting pack. So within the pack, we got, which I've drunk, the bottle of the 12-year-old, and you get a beaker and a pipette. And you also got an empty bottle, which is for blending your own, because each of these are different flavour profiles of whiskey. And there's nothing wrong with actually just taking a sip of each of them to see what you think. But you've got floral, you've got fruity, you've got citrus, and creamy and smoky. Have a try of each one individually and see which one you like. See if you can pick out particular flavours and notes from each one. Maybe experiment with blending them and seeing how you go. And the blending aspect takes us on to a point I'm going to raise in a minute. But a pack like this retails, depending upon when you can get out an offer, between £8 and £30, depending on where you're going at the time of year. But try that. It's a good way of exploring. That's my second pack. So, talking about tasting packs, what you can do is if you find that like I mentioned with the Glenfiddich 12, you could pick up packs like this from the same distillery. So this one's McMira, and I did a review of the Sven's Rock not long ago. But if you liked a particular whiskey from a distillery, have a look to see if they do these tasting packs, because what you're going to get is a very similar style and characteristics, which you'll find in that one moving through each of them. But each of them are going to have different influences from maybe the woods they've been matured in, or maybe because they've been smoked, or maybe they've been matured in a slightly different type of barrel. For example, looking at the Lakes Distillery, they do their one blend, but then they also do a sherried variation, a port variation, an orange wine variation, a muscatel wine variation. They're fantastic ways to see whether they do a tasting pack, so that you can go through each one and identify where and what flavour styles you enjoy. And then we're looking at kind of the more intermediate level now. You've tried lots of whiskies, you've kind of identified where to go, you're really ready to start testing your palate a bit more. Then pick up something like this. This is the Johnnie Walker Discovery Pack. I did a review of the blue label a while ago, so that one's gone. But these are all Scotch whiskies, blended Scotch whiskies. And this is probably where you're going to start wanting to taste grain whiskey. So you can pick up a miniature of, let's say, Hague Club. Try that, because that's going to give you a flavour of what a grain whiskey is like. And you may enjoy grain, you may think, why haven't I tasted this earlier in my journey? Grain whiskies are less common as distillery bottlings. They tend to be independent bottlings. Yes, you can pick up the odd distillery bottling, but unlike the Hague, they're not as common. But the advantage of trying something like a Hague is that when you start moving on to a Johnnie Walker, you can then taste it and start thinking about dissecting the different flavours that make that whiskey up. And this is where the Glenkinchie 12 comes in, because the Glenkinchie 12 is the lowland home of Johnnie Walker. The Speyside home of Johnnie Walker is Cardew. And what we're going to do with this kind of a journey is you can pick up bottles like this one, which is a 200ml bottle. I picked this one up, I think I paid about £12 for it, which isn't too bad. But you can find out what whiskies go in to making up the blends, very much the same way as the Chivas blending kit there. Taste the Glenkinchie 12. Maybe try a miniature of Johnnie Walker Red. See if you can pick up this in the Johnnie Walker Red. Try Cardew 12. See whether you can identify any of the Cardew elements in the Johnnie Walkers. If you're brave enough and you're ready enough for more smoky whiskey, try the Johnnie Walker Green Label. It's a blended malt whiskey. There's no grain there, and it's a blend of 4 whiskies. You've got Talisker, Clynelish, Kalila, Linkwood. You can buy the Clynelish 14-year-old. You can buy the Linkwood 12. Now, obviously, the Johnnie Walker Green are 15-year-old, but you could try buying the different samples from those distilleries, even if they aren't necessarily the right expressions that went in the blend, but it'll help you identify the different characteristics of each whiskies to help you on your journey to be able to better understand and appreciate what has gone into those blends. Once you've done that, and this all takes time, by nosing and talking with people, finding people on a similar journey as you, be it online on a Facebook group, or by signing up to a chat room like the Certified Originals, links down in the description. And you'll be able to get guidance as to where to go. And quite often with these groups, if you suggest, well, hey guys, it'd be really good if we do a tasting evening where we'll concentrate on doing mixology. or we'll concentrate on dissecting a blend and doing the composition, the components that make up the blend, and identifying each one in comparison. Then you're going to start developing a sophisticated palate. Now, before I finish, just something that's a little bit relevant here. A lot of people will be watching this video and they may have switched off early on within it. Some of you may have stayed to the end. Some of you may have jumped to the end. Some of you maybe watch the whole thing and go, "You're talking bullshit. What do you know? Go away." You're right. What do I know? This is my experience. This is my... If I was to approach it again, this is how I would approach it, because I find that I may have started wrong, but I moved and I started to follow a more organised, a more structured way of training my palate. So if we go back and we talk about the Glenfiddich 12 and then try the 15 and maybe the 18, that's what I did with Glenfarclas. I started with the 12. It was actually the first one I picked up, or was it the 10? But the 10, then the 12. I managed to pick the 8. I picked up the 105, and I tried each one, and I was able to identify the distillery characteristics and how time in the oak changed the whiskey. And I was able to develop my palate sufficiently to appreciate the subtleties and the flavours and the nuances going on there. And how's that helped me? Well, recently, Omar from the Black Barrel Sippers Club sent me 5 blind drams. But nobody's asked, how was I able to identify the last 3 drams? Well, I'm going to give a little bit of insight on how I did that. So dram number 1, I was well off the mark with that one. I didn't know what it was. I'm trying to think now what it was. No, can't remember. Dram number 2, I thought was... no. Dram number 1 I thought was Deanston Virgin Oak, or something along those lines. It turned out to be Octotian American Oak. Quite a similar whiskey style, different region, but quite a similar style. But I'd never tried the Octotian American Oak, so I had no point of reference. Then was the second one. I thought it was maybe a Cardew Gold, the Reserve. It was actually the Black Bottle. But there's a point there. That Cardew that I mentioned is one of the core expressions that make up Johnnie Walker blends. And whilst it may not be in the Black Bottle, I was on those kind of lines that there was something familiar. But I hadn't tried Black Bottle, had no point of reference for it. The next 3, Hague, single grain. I happen to have both bottles of the Hagues. I've got the Hague Clubman and the Hague Deluxe. And you will recognise Hague. There's nothing special about the ability to pick up Hague. I tasted it, and it was a grain whiskey straight away because I tried it. I had a memory for that particular whiskey because I'd tasted it, I'd nosed it, and I'd built a memory for it, and I was able to pick up the Hague. The one after Hague was Jameson. And whilst the Jameson that I tried was as a blind dram was 4 pure, I had tried Jameson. I've tried a few other Irish whiskies. They're different, but the Jameson stood out based on my experience of drinking it. But it's the last one, which is the one that is probably the more remarkable one, which is where kind of my ranting and raving and talking kind of makes sense. The last one was Monkey Shoulder. I've only ever tried a 50ml sample, miniature of the Monkey Shoulder. I've tried the Monkey Shoulder, the smoky version as well, but the regular Monkey Shoulder, I've only ever had a 50ml miniature, which I had part of it as part of the review and the rest of it a few days later. But by tasting and smelling, I was able to identify from the original tasting the distillery characteristics. And if you watch that review of the blind tasting of the Monkey Shoulder, you'll see that I talk about how it's got characteristics of Glenfiddich, and that could it be a Glenfiddich? Also mentioned that there's elements that are missing, but it was pushing us along the lines of Glenfiddich. Monkey Shoulder is part of the Grant's range of whiskies, Grant's own Glenfiddich. So I was able to identify through nosing and tasting and memory a similarity between experiences of trying whiskies from a kind of family distilleries and remember and identify them in a blind sample. So there's method in my madness a bit there. The fact that you're able to remember these things, if you enjoy them, if you put a time and a place and a moment to them, attach maybe a bit of emotion to it, it may help you on your journey. Saying that, I'll probably never repeat such a stunt again. It was probably completely coincidental. But hey ho, that's these things. Now, I've ranted on enough. This is 36 minutes. I probably only intended this to be 20 minutes. But that's the journey from an introduction to Scotch to kind of hitting the intermediary levels where you're kind of confident that you've tasted something, you can identify through nose and taste different flavours within the whiskey and move on through your journey. And as you start to feel more confident on a whiskey, then you can start thinking about moving away and jumping to other distilleries and other profiles of whiskey, but be sensible with your money and don't start just spending on bottles that you're going to have to put in your cupboard and go, I'll have to come back to that one. I'll have to come back to that one. When do you hit Islay? When you've tried a sufficiently smoky whiskey on your journey that you enjoy and you want to explore that smoke aspect more. Once you've tried something that's got smoke and you're happy that you're not off-put by it, then go there. And don't think because you're a smoker you might enjoy them. I'm not a smoker. I enjoy smoky whiskies. There's people I know who do smoke and they hate them. Hate smoky whiskies. That's it for now. I hope you did stay for the end of this video. Give us a subscribe, give us a like, and come back next time. Later.